All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. My name is Kendall Ho. I'm an emergency physician in Vancouver Coastal Health and also the Executive Director of Intercultural Online Health Network. On behalf of the VCH Aboriginal Health Unit and also the Intercultural Online Health Network, which is part of Department of Emergency Medicine at UBC, we welcome you. Thank you very much for being here with us. We also want to thank the Ministry of Health and also the Vancouver Physician Staff Association Facility Engagement for their support and sponsorship of this round. I would like to first do a land acknowledgement to start our round. It's my privilege today to be able to do the land acknowledgements. I really want to acknowledge that we are in different parts of the First Nations unceded territories, wherever we are listening to or participating in this event. For myself, I live in and work in Vancouver, which is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so I'd like to just take a minute to be thankful and ask you to join me in being thankful for the opportunity that we have to be able to be where we are. Very excited that we are launching this round for the in 2021. This is our first round for this year. Last year, some of you may have joined us in September, and thank you very much for that. And for today, we again very, very excited. We have 302 people sign up for this round. So we're very, very excited about the fact that we can continue to socialize together. This round really is designed for health professionals working in Vancouver Coastal Health or wherever you work to increase our understanding and learning about cultural safety. And for this series, today is the first part of a two-part series about understanding the dimensions of health and wellness from Indigenous perspective, from principles to practice. So we are very grateful to our speaker today, who really have very deep knowledge to be able to share with us. So momentarily, I'll be introducing her. But hopefully today, not only do we form some foundation to continue our own learning, but also I invite you, all our participants, to share your thoughts, your own knowledge, so that we can carry out some knowledge exchange together, and any questions you may have, both in the principles and in the practice of cultural Indigenous safety. How can we learn from each other to advance this together? First, I would like to invite Lindsay Ascott. Lindsay is the director at the Ministry of Health, British Columbia, and really is the very strong leader in supporting ICON in advancing Indigenous and multicultural engagement. So I'd like to pass this time over to Lindsay, so that Lindsay, you can give your opening remarks. Lindsay.
Great, Kendall, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from Victoria, and so I'd like to acknowledge that myself and the Ministry of Health is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, and thank them for allowing us to work, live, and play on this beautiful land. Although I will say today it's a bit rainy, but it looks like it's passing. But I'd also like to acknowledge the Métis chartered community located here in Victoria. So thanks for having me. This is the second session that I've attended, and I want to say the first session, I'm really excited to be able to join today. So not only do I give this quick opening remark, I actually also join. And have thoroughly enjoyed these events. So I'm hoping that all of you also will be able to enjoy them as well. I find that this presentation is particularly meaningful now, given that the In Plain Sight report was released back in November. And so a bit of a plug, if you haven't had a chance to read that, I would recommend that everyone in the province read it. And really, I'm looking forward to today's event to understand the dimensions of wellness in Indigenous communities, because I believe that obviously the first step is understanding, and that understanding then can lead us to taking steps towards working together to eliminate racism in the healthcare system. And so really humbled by what was in that report, and really grateful for the opportunity to hear from our speakers today, so that really we can move forward together. So thank you for everyone here today. And in particular, I want to also thank ICON for their incredible work. So for those of you who don't know, the ministry has funded and collaborated with ICON for over 10 years now. And really, despite the challenges that 2020 has presented, I think that's really minimizing the pandemic. It's a nice way of saying the pandemic's impacted us all. But really, despite the pandemic, ICON has continued to build collaborations and participations in all of their events, and really thrilled to see how many people are on this call. So really looking forward to hearing the presentation today. So thank you so much. So back to you, Kendall.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Tremendous to have this opportunity to work with Ministry of Health. Also, a tremendous partnership and co-leadership. In fact, the Vancouver Coastal Health Aboriginal Health Unit is very much a mover, shaker, and power through these rounds, and we're very happy to support and participate and co-partner with them. So let me introduce Laurel Jabermani, who's from the Vancouver Coastal Health Aboriginal Health Units. Laurel, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Sure. Thanks, Kendall. My name is Laurel. I am a settler of Tamil and Dutch ancestry, and I am zooming in today on the unceded traditional homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. The Aboriginal Health team at Vancouver Coastal Health works to improve the cultural safety of services provided to Indigenous patients in the Vancouver Coastal Health region. And I'm every day grateful to be able to work in this way to improve the care of Indigenous patients. And I'm particularly grateful for my opportunity to work with Kendall and others on the ICON team and other physicians to improve the cultural safety of physician services, particularly in hospitals, because as Lindsay mentioned, it's becoming more and more clear to all of us how unsafe care can be in hospitals, and it's something that's important to me. So grateful to be here, and back to you, Kendall.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really want to acknowledge the leadership of Leslie Bonchar. Of course, she's the Executive Director of VCH Aboriginal Health, together with Priscilla Tedpale, who's the Director in moving forward in both on the engagement and quality side. It's just tremendous to be able to work with them and together with you, Laura, in moving this forward. I know that you're not here to listen to me, so let me immediately jump to introduce our speaker so that we can engage Dr. Terry Aldridge into this conversation. Many of you may already know Terry. Dr. Aldridge is a carrier from the Tl'Azt'En Nation located north of Fort St. James. Dr. Aldridge herself is a family doctor, work in the Carrier-Sakani Family Services. She's also the medical director of primary care for First Nations Health Authority. And she, very importantly, in 2018, she won the first 5 years in practice achievement award through the BC College of Family Physicians. She's been very humble and didn't want me to introduce this, but I want to emphasize that. But Terry, tremendous to have you here. I also had the pleasure to be a co-presenter with Terry to a group of medical students, and I heard the passion that she has and the care and the commitment she has in this. And not only as a physician, not only as a community member, not only as a policymaker, but really as a human being. So I really appreciate Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. So what we're going to do is Terry's going to speak. She's going to present some slides. But we're looking at speaking till around 12:30, 12:35 or so, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. Questions and answers. I know that some of you may need to leave by 1 o'clock. That's why we want to maximize time for interaction, but the round itself will last till 1:30. So make sure that if you have questions, please put it into the chat box so that you can type it in. Laurel will be tracking those questions. We'll be going over those questions as we move forward in the Q&A. In the meantime, let me hand the time over to you, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hari Swento, it's very nice to be here, and thanks so much to Kendall and the ICON team and Vancouver Coastal for inviting me. I see many friendly faces, some from some projects I work on, some from as preceptors from the Indigenous Family Medicine Program, where I'm also the site director. And so just so lovely to see many people here, and some people who also have knowledge and expertise in this area, and people I've had the honor of learning from. So hopefully we can have a great discussion together. So I'm going to start with a prayer, and then I'm going to share a few slides and a few stories kind of in a more high level way, and then really kind of maximize the time for dialogue. Having done a few of these talks in the past, I've actually been so impressed, and yeah, just where like just being able to dive into questions and having some good dialogue where the discussion can go. So to start, if you feel called to, if you can sit up in your chair, maybe put your feet on the ground if it's accessible to you. Take a deep breath and land in our very large virtual circle here today. And so I'm holding my eagle feather, have a candle going. I burnt some sage earlier to help kind of call in the Creator and our good ancestors to be in this space with us today. So thank you, Creator, for bringing us here today. Thank you to all those who helped make this event possible, and thank you for all the tech support and all the people who took time out of their day to gather with us today in the virtual circle. Please, Creator, be with all of us as we navigate dual public health emergencies and so many other big, important lessons that we've learned in the last year, and be especially with those who may be sick, who are hurting, who are suffering, those who may be in grief and loss, and please be with them, Creator, and help guide them on their healing journeys. Thank you so much. All my relations. So I'll just share my screen here. There we go. Me and technology are somewhat at odds, but there we go. Hopefully everybody can see that all right. So today we're going to discuss a couple of things, but before I do that, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Deketh from Tl'Azt'En. Deketh is I guess the Deketh word for our people. Carrier was what we were called by early settlers when they came into the area. There's a number of different stories around how we got that name. But carrier, I did see an early question before we got started, is an umbrella term for a group of nations, really, similar to like the Cree Nation or the Haida Nation. And so there's a number of different communities and even languages within the carrier people, but most of our traditional territory is located in north central BC. So, and that is on my mom's side. On my dad's side, I'm Métis Cree, a mixed European, and I'm really honored to be able to live, work, and play on the Tl'Azt'En traditional territory, which is just pictured on the right there. So this is in a park overlooking Prince George with the Fraser River just below, and just to the right of the picture, just out of view, is how Tl'Azt'en got their name. So Tl'Azt'en means where the two rivers meet, so where the Nechako and the Fraser River meet. And this is a picture of me and my maternal grandmother. And yeah, I guess I'm a family doctor by trade. I always forget that part. And I've been working with Carey County Family Services for the last 7 years. And I've worked in a number of different places, including Bella Bella. I've worked in Prince George, and I've done a lot of outreach to different communities in North Central BC. And as well, I'm the site director for the Indigenous Family Medicine Program, and recently became the medical director for primary care for Fnha. So it's just a brief overview of our objectives. So I'm just going to briefly just touch on a couple Indigenous worldview philosophies. Again, that idea is somewhat of a pan-Indigenous concept, considering that we are, Indigenous peoples have incredible amount of diversity, and these worldviews are not homogeneous. So there's a lot of variability, but there's often some similarities that that come up. And then I'm going to briefly talk about racism as a determinant of health, and then hopefully be able to leave you with a couple practical tips on things that you can do in your own spheres of influence. I also noticed that there was somebody else from my nation in one of the chat comment boxes a while ago. And so Hadi, yeah, such an honor to have other nation members here with me. So to start, I wanted to say that really, like I sometimes have shared some general teachings or philosophies, from different books, and like Honoring the Medicine, where it kind of outlines some, general principles that are common among a number of nations and things like that. But really, I thought that can be busy, and it often feels like kind of going through a list of things. And really, I think the core teaching around a lot of these principles is around oneness. So, and in my end, I guess I will take a step back to say that I'm speaking from my experience growing up in North Central BC. I've been privileged enough to learn from a number of elders from across the country. And I have a traditional elder, a kumu in Hawaii, that I learned from. And so all of that is kind of informing what I share with you. But one of the things I will share later is around not assuming that my teachings or my stories necessarily represent all Indigenous people. So I just kind of want to share that up front. So the idea of oneness is that we are all connected, not just to other humans, but to the environment, the land, animals, plants, and including the spirit world. And because we're all connected, the fundamental principles of respect are really important, because if we don't respect the land, if we don't respect our food, if we don't respect each other, then you're really actually disrespecting yourself because of that idea of oneness. And so in Indigenous worldviews, we would say that's crazy. Why would you disrespect yourself? So that's why respect is one of our really fundamental value, and why we're very relational. And so we see ourselves as connected. So we see that building a good connection that's based on respect and trust and love is really important, because if we're all connected, then that's how we show ourselves respect, love, and also why reciprocity is really, really important. So kind of the idea that the natural flow of things is that, if you give too much, then you will deplete yourself. And if you receive too much, that can also create imbalance. So really that there needs to be a fair energy exchange. And so those are just some of the teachings that I received. One of the ways that this principle plays out, and what kind of inspired me to go into medical school, to pursue higher level education, is the idea that which is kind of a famous teaching, but that the pride of one is the pride of all. So it's really important for us to become the best versions of ourselves, because it's not just about me. who I am reflects on my family, which reflects on my community, reflects on my nation. And so I guess in my quest, I've always had this sense of service, of wanting to give back, and really wanting to, be on my healing journey and to continue to grow and yeah, I guess become the best version of myself. And so that has often what has driven my work. And then the other idea around just kind of delving into reciprocity, this is the last story I'll share around this, but is that about the fair energy exchange. And so this is actually a teaching I received from my Kumu Lawrence Aki in Hawaii. But I've heard it echoed from traditional healers and knowledge keepers all over Turtle Island as well, is the idea that, often traditional healers would, they would be chosen, or they would choose their path very young. And for many years, sometimes even decades, their path would be to get to know themselves, to get to know who they are, what their values are. And so that they could be really strong in who they are, what their gifts are, how they can be of service. And when that strong foundation, what is called pa'a in Native Hawaiian, then they can go out and see people and treat people. Because when you're healthy and well, then you spread your wellness. And when you don't have that strong foundation and you're unwell, then you can also spread that. And so it was really important to build that strong foundation. And for me, in my journey through medicine, that's been one of the pieces that I feel we could do better in kind of the traditional or Western medicine, is how can we prepare people to be healers, to be those beacons of light, to help people weather really challenging and difficult moments in their life, also really good ones. So thank you. So with that, I wanted to share a concept of the medicine wheel that I've always really loved. It was done by a woman's hand drumming group from the Acknowledgement Nation. And what I particularly love about this is that it has culture in the middle. And to me, that's really important. For me, being disconnected from culture is like when you're on a path and suddenly it's pitch black or the lights go out. It's really easy to go off the path and lose your way when you can't see. And culture is really that kind of light. And so even though you can get lost or go off the path, it's easier to find your way back. It's also that center, that strong connection, and that connection can be different for many people. It may not be expressed how stereotypes would suggest it's expressed, but it's really a concept of really knowing who you are, what you stand for, and where you come from, and then letting that guide your journey. And then the regular kind of holistic health model that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, around mental, spiritual, emotional, physical well-being, and really looking at the harmony between these. And I think at different times in our lives, we may need to focus a little bit more on mental or spiritual or physical health. But really just looking at, if it's too long that there's an overemphasis on one side versus some of the other sides, then that's when we can get into imbalances. A story I heard from actually an Australian Indigenous person was, the kind of the balance between traditional medicine and more of a Western approach, is that he said, if I go out into the desert and I fall and break my leg, I will go to the hospital and I'll get them to put a cast on my leg. But then I will go see my traditional healers or my elders so that I can identify if there's things in my spiritual or emotional or mental being that I need to address so that I don't need to learn that lesson again. I don't need to break another leg. And so it's just that idea of, you know, having a balance and being able to have a circle of care and whatever that means to you. And then on the outside, just talking about our social networks or supports, that idea that we're all in community. And, you know, on the outer circle is really talking about, you know, how we live that good life. Like how we live a life that we're proud of, that we feel vital, and that we feel that we are empowered and are able to do good. I also wanted to share a bit about the Fnha wellness model, which you can just see on the right. And there's many circles. There's 5 circles within a circle. And these teachings were passed down from many generations. And it's the idea that wellness belongs to each of us. So just like when we become healthier and well, that spreads out into our community. When our community becomes healthier and well, that impacts us. And so it's that idea that, you know, even though the human being is at the center, and, you know, to say that we need to take individual responsibility for our healing journeys, it's bi-directional, because the community that's surrounding that human being also needs to work together to help address and be healthier together. And so as I said, the inner circle represents the individual. The second circle is that kind of holistic model again. The third circle is talking about some fundamental values, and there's some I spoke to already around respect, relationship, responsibility, and wisdom. And just that idea that wisdom is a little bit different than just knowledge. Wisdom is usually when we can incorporate that knowledge into our lives. And then the fourth circle is again our relatives. We're talking about our land, our community, our nations, our family. And then that fifth circle is talking about the social determinants, our environment, culture, and economy, like how our finances are, that sort of thing. And then the outer circle really represents the Fnha vision of strong children, families, elders, and people in the community. And that, you know, when we work together, that's how we can really achieve a really high vision of health and well-being. So just transitioning a little bit here. And so generally kind of reviewing, you know, Indigenous worldviews or philosophies, those teachings are usually pretty accessible, sorry. People like to learn about those things. It doesn't tend to bring up any strong emotions, whereas talking about things like race and racism, sexism, any of the isms, talking about things like privilege and that sort of thing, can sometimes bring up a lot of emotions for people, sometimes sadness, sometimes anger, sometimes just discomfort. And so before I kind of transition into that, I always like to take a moment in a virtual circle. It can be a little bit more challenging to ensure a safe space, but I'll do my best. And so part of that is just talking a little bit about what my philosophies are around this. And so one of them is that, you know, really I'm here because I want to call you in. I take it as a given that you signed up for this webinar for a reason, and that we all want to know and do better, as opposed to calling people out, which, you know, if there's acute harm going on, like if you're seeing somebody being attacked in the subway or something like that, then of course, like, you know, calling people out in those contexts can be important. But in these kind of educational contexts, you know, I'm not here to point fingers or blame anyone. I'm really just here to call you into the discussion. And that sometimes a lot of these reactions is because like talking about racism can bring up a lot of shame. And it's a bit of a skill to develop kind of some shame resilience, because when we go into shame, our automatic reactions is to push it away, to avoid it, sometimes to fight, you know, in many different ways. And so I just invite you to be reflective and, you know, curious about what comes up for you, and know that it's human. And that it's good to have good intentions. Like I'm here because I'm hopeful that some of the words I share will be helpful. But it's really important to register impact. And so, you know, and so it's really important to me that, you know, that you share honestly. If something, you know, if something I landed didn't land well for you, you know, I'm here to grow and learn as well. And that's really important philosophy in general, that we do our work with the best of intentions. But if we're not taking time to assess our impact, then that's when we can go down a bad road. And just to say that, you know, in this space, we need to have ways that we can hold each other accountable, so that we can really address system structures of oppression, and really address racism, sexism, all of the isms in a good way, and in a way that is safe. But anytime we talk about accountability, it can be tough because people automatically feel called out. So they feel like maybe it's not safe and they can't engage. So there needs to be a balance where we can engage and hold each other accountable, but do it in a way that maintains our individual integrity and respect for one another. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about before we jump into the racism discussion is around how we build ethical space of engagement between people with disparate worldviews. And I'm not going to go into each of these different pieces because that would be a bit of a different talk. But just the idea of, you know, we touched a little bit on the A, like here it's Aboriginality. We don't really use that term anymore, but you know, what's the idea of being Indigenous? What does that mean? And it'll be different depending on where you live, work, and play, and the different nations that you work with. What are some barriers? Recognizing the barriers that Indigenous people face to access and care, and learning about the history of colonization, but also colonialism, because as many of us know, that colonization isn't of the past. It continues on even today. In a number of different ways. And that learning about these principles is based on these values. And again, I've kind of touched on them already. So just to quickly say, respect, reciprocity, relationship, which has always been kind of the fundamental values of this. But in recent years, also around reconciliation and responsibility has been added. So, and those things are really around saying like, okay, we need to talk about it, we need to name it, and then we need to move to action. So, in particular, I wanted to talk a bit about racist anonymous philosophy to kind of introduce the idea of racism as a social determinant of health. And so racist anonymous was actually coined by a couple of different people in the States who did a lot of cultural competency training in organizations. And over time, they really started to wonder if they were actually making an impact. They would often go back to the same organizations, year after year. And so they started looking at doing pre and post bias assessments. And they actually found that, that there was kind of three groups. There was people who were called in coming in, and they were called in going out. And there were people who were more overtly racist, and they generally left being still racist or more overtly racist. But there was a whole group in the middle, and they tended to be a more sensitive group. And depending on how the sessions went and all of that, that they could often actually be shifted to being a bit more biased. And, that made them really curious about, how they can make more of an impact. And what they kind of landed on was that, you know, it's people who are more called in kind of really respond to that ethical framework in a good way, and it helps them learn and engage, and, you know, helps them to be better allies and accomplices. But people who may be not as far along in their journeys, you know, they may need a different approach. And part of that is recognizing that, you know, there isn't like it's not like a black and white. It's not like you're racist or you're not racist, but really that all of us have these implicit and explicit biases. Some of them pertain to race. Some of them pertain to sex. Some of them pertain to religion, and a host of other things. And those biases are informed by our families of origin, where we grew up, the histories and the systems around us, the TV we watch, the books we read, and all of that. And so in the context of North America, where we've been settled by primarily Western Europe, the systems that are guiding our implicit and explicit biases emphasize or uphold kind of more Euro-Christian, heavily, I guess, weighted on the Protestant side, and people who are racialized as white and men. And so these systems have been around for hundreds of years. It's nobody's fault. It's just what we inherited. And because it's built in, it's hard to see it. And it's hard to know how in our different capacities, how these biases have influenced us. And so the only real way of being able to uncover or think about our biases is by being actively reflective. And so you can Google this. The new updated racism scale is now, I think, 2 tiers. And I think it's like 2.0, but it doesn't fit as nice on the slide. So essentially it has like the scale of racism, which says, like, you know, overt racism, which is the racism we all think about. And, you know, for the most part, all of us would say, we're not that, we don't do those things. And then on the other side is allyship and accomplices. And the reason why they're still on the racism scale is because if you're somebody who needs to have allies and accomplices, then that means that you live in a world or a society that's not inherently safe or made for you. And so part of the exercise of this is not to shame or blame any, like, where you're at, but it's more to say that, you know, as we address racism, even like as we, I guess, move forward in how we address it, that the fundamental biases or assumptions that results in, you know, white supremacy groups, for instance, is still rooted in, say, white saviorship or woke justification. And so really, like, trying to uncover and heal that takes a lot. And it's a journey. We always can do more work to uncover our blind spots and where we may have additional biases. And those are going to be different. And so the Racist Anonymous approach is to say, you know, it's important for us to do our own work. Like, I think when we think of systems or organizations or countries, it's easy to kind of say, oh yeah, the system's racist, or oh yeah, the healthcare system is racist. But it's a lot harder to look at yourself and be like, well, how am I contributing to the system? You know, the idea that there is no system, we are the system. And then, you know, what about my colleagues? And one of the questions I often get asked is like, oh, when I see racism, how can I call it out? Or how can I address it? Which is a great conversation. But I say it's just as important to say and to reflect on, what do I do if somebody calls me out or says that maybe something I did was biased? because again, because of the shame that comes up with this, it's so much easier to think of it outside yourself. And so really the Racism Anonymous approach, thinking of racism on a scale, is to help say that, you know, it's not just you, it's not just me, it's all of us. We all have this inside of us. And in order to actually be effectively move into action around something, is to name it, and then we can quantify it, and then we can really start looking at how to address the problems, which is healthcare is around health disparities, health inequities, around people having worse outcomes and dying sooner. And so those are big problems. But if we can't effectively name the things that are contributing to it, asking the tough questions and quantifying things, it's going to be really hard to address those problems. And so my first tool is the reflective practice. It's fundamental. It's the core skill, not only in cultural safety and humility training, but it's the core skill in physician health and well-being. Is being able to take those times to pause and reflect and critically analyze your practice in some way, or consciously analyze, sorry. And look at how you can make improvements compared to, you know, the literature, what others are doing, and see where you fall and be able to make improvements over time. And when we have that space to be able to stop and reflect, oftentimes we can start to uncover some of our more implicit biases, so the things that aren't readily in our conscious awareness. And so when you're seeing Indigenous patients, things to keep in mind is it's really important to introduce yourself, to allow them to introduce themselves, to ask for permission. That's a very important trauma-informed principle. And sometimes, especially when we look at dissociation and freeze responses, people may not, it may be really hard for them to vocalize. And so it's really important to pay attention to body language, having a storytelling approach. So allowing people to kind of talk through what's going on for them. I know we're all incredibly strapped for time and there's a lot of pressures, but oftentimes if you let them speak, you'll uncover a lot more than kind of yes or no answers. Assume diversity. So again, you know, don't take the stories I've shared or from my cultural background and assume that that applies to everybody. It's really important to ask questions and to ask questions about, you know, if they're connected to culture, if that's something that's, you know, important to them. It's also really important to use inclusive language. Some of the feedback from some of the groups I've been working with has been with COVID, because family members aren't allowed necessarily to be in the hospitals at this time. And so family members are becoming informed more and more on the phone, that they're going away being like, I didn't understand anything that they said. And so it's really important to double check understanding and to use language that is easily understood. To stay flexible and humble. And, you know, as you do more and more work, sometimes our egos get in the way and we lose some of that humility because we think that we know. And so it's always really important to continue to be reflective, to know that we're all on this journey. And in general, there's no going to be an end point or a finish line. You know, we can spend our lives reflecting on our biases and probably still uncover them decades down the road. And so don't assume ethnicity and culture. So that's just that, stay curious, stay open, ask questions. Don't treat every Indigenous patient the same. Don't assume a level of importance of culture. Again, for some Indigenous people, they may not have strong ties due to many things, like you know, for people who may have been part of the 60 scoop and taken from birth and different things. So it's always important to not assume, and don't under investigate, under treat. So again, another talk for another time would be around the literature that supports how implicit and explicit biases affect our decision making, with the resulting outcomes that for Indigenous people, generally speaking, those biases are in the form that physicians in these studies were that they would not take, say, an Indigenous person's pain or symptoms as seriously as a non-Indigenous person, which would usually result in them ordering less investigations and that sort of thing, and not treating as aggressively. And then the last point is around don't keep silent about witnessing culturally unsafe care. It's really important that, you know, that safe spaces around this are generated. I don't think it's any benefit to shame and blame people. However, we do need to start talking about it because if we can't talk about it, if we can't name it, we can't heal it. Ooh. And so the tools for the toolbox.
Sorry,
I know
Terri.
you guys. Yes.
Sorry, Terry, just maybe we are getting close to 12:50. I want to make sure that's at least a good,
Yes.
5 to 10 minutes for exchange. So sorry to rush you, but love to hear about the toolbox for sure.
Oh yeah, no worries. So this is my last slide. Apologies for that. I always talk too much. Remember, so just around the traditional territory, I know you guys had a whole session on that, which is great. Be aware of the context and Indigenous perspective. So just even recognizing that you interacting with people with different worldviews, use reflective practice and engage in ethical space. Complete Fnhas or some of the other courses that are available. Check out some practical resources and, you know, as you're able, continue reading. So some great books are Medicine Unbundled, Inconvenient Indian, The First People, Second Class Treatment, and of course the In Plain Sight report. Yeah. And I can stop sharing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry. And again, my sincere apologies for cutting you off. I know there's so much wisdom there. So really, really want to appreciate your time. I want to quickly reflect some of the comments I see, and there's a couple of questions posted, so I'll get going. And I welcome you continue to type into the chat line. Laurel and I will keep an eye on it as we move forward. I think first, thank for some of you for already starting land acknowledgement of sharing about the Fraser River, and also the Nuchanoth, the connectedness, Alex, that you spoke to about people are connected to land, connected to everybody. So affirming that, and also the link to the medicine wheel. One question, Terry, is would we be able to share some of your slides? I know this session is recorded. So for people who want to see this, they will have a link. For the slides, Terry, any chance we may be able to share some of your slides if possible?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Terry. So we'll make that available. I think there are some comments about Sarah. You talk about looking at our own biases and lead by example. Wonderful comment. Stacy talked about sometimes the system itself may cause us to also have further biases. So we need to watch out for that. Terry, one of the conversation lead in the chat is about how do you create safe space in the clinical encounter? For example, what are some of the examples of inclusive language, and how do we meet our patients at their pace? Do you have any thoughts about creating that safe space as a one-on-one health professional and a patient in that particular space? Do you have any tips on inclusive language or meeting them at their pace?
Yeah, so I think there's some good general philosophies, but again, the most important thing is to check in. Is that idea like of ensuring or checking with the patient around language or their comfort level, because again, everybody's going to be a little bit different. And so, there could be people who are really highly educated, and so they may feel like you're talking down to them. And so they may want, more higher level language or however you want to say that. Whereas others may be like, I'm sorry, I'm just like really anxious and I actually didn't hear anything you say. So there could be such a variety depending on the person and the presentation. I think I think, doing that pause and introducing yourself and allowing the person to introduce themselves, if you feel comfortable, even sometimes asking where they're from can be a good icebreaker. And if you feel comfortable, you can share where you're from. Again, it's a part about that relational way of being, just being able to kind of feel like they can place you in the world. And, I think kind of mannerisms is, again, we're under a lot of time pressure. So doing things that kind of make you feel more settled and like you're not rushing often helps relax other people. And, I think one of my colleagues often says, it's just be nice. I think nice you can kind of fake nice. But if that's all you have accessible, then fake nice. But really, the hope is, and what our elders say is like, we just want people to be kind. And when you think of kindness, like one of my favorite definitions of kindness is love in action. But you can't fake kindness. And so it's a capacity to be able to touch base with your compassion and to really like show genuine care and concern for a person. Even if you have limitations or there's not, like, even if there's things that you can't offer them or you're unsure of where to go next, we can always kind of share that care and compassion. And I'd also say, like, one of the things is, I guess, like asking about, after a treatment plan is to ask if there's anybody else that they would like for you to notify or talk to, especially now during COVID. Oftentimes, people can feel more comfortable with a family member and, going to the hospital in particular, but even coming to clinics and things like that can be a traumatizing experience for some. And so it just may be really hard for them to hear and integrate what you're saying. And so, and that person could be a family member, it could be a support person that they know, but being kind of inclusive in that circle of care is really important.
Wow, those are great tips. Terry, if I don't mind, if you don't mind me injecting an additional question from me, again, I really welcome more questions coming from the chat. A lot of people asking you for a reading list, so it'd be great to get some books and reading for us to learn. I understand, especially in plain sight, the report has spoken to the fact that many Indigenous community members don't even want to set foot in emergency department where I work because of many traumatic experiences they had before. And so if they were in the emergency space, if I'm encountering with the patient, I sense that there's that kind of huge reluctance to be there. Are there ways that I can, of course, genuine kindness is important, introduce myself, introduce where I come from. Are there additional tips if we were to detect that kind of really strong reticence from the individual? Are there additional things you would suggest we do to try to help the patient to understand that we're trying to create a safe space here?
Yeah, so I feel like that could be a whole other talk just around things like, developing kind of a trauma-informed spaces. So sometimes even the way that things are set up can be really triggering for people. And also around like how we can be really trauma-informed. Also, just pause to say that I know there's a lot of great expertise on the call. So if there's other people who'd like to jump in, that would, welcome that as well. But so part of it is kind of registering responses. So, so somebody so when we think of trauma responses, I think we think of like fight or freeze. So people who may be really activated, yelling or, not able to sit still or, like that sort of thing. And, in those situations around like, how you can de-escalate conversations, those sorts of skills and training can be really helpful. But really it's just like trying to talk in a calm voice, assure that, you validate their emotions and validate that, what they're feeling is okay. And that, and yeah, I guess just trying to understand, why they're expressing themselves in this way. And then, if they feel like it's accessible, you can try to get them to ground in different ways. Or if they just need to talk it out, that sort of thing. But often de-escalating people can sometimes actually be simple with the right skill set compared to people who are in a deep freeze or dissociative state. One, because oftentimes we don't really we don't register it as much. We can even see them as really compliant or not very demanding, and really that, because they just nod their head or they say yes, they just agree with everything you're saying and what you're asking of them, but they're not really there. And this can be more common in women or in older women. And so it's not universal though. And so again, that's why that kind of follow up around like, asking them like, really explaining their rights, that they can say no, and reiterating like why you want to do something, if they would like you to reach out to somebody, can be really important in people who are in dissociative states. Grounding exercises can also be really helpful around attaching to breath, or like the 5 sense exercise and things like that. But really sometimes like people can be so activated that they just want to leave. And I think always maintaining that people, unless you like, unless there's other reasons like under the Mental Health Act or other reasons why people, need to stay. But I think trying to give people autonomy and expression, and just always encouraging them to come back. Like if they really need to leave, just to say like, I'm really sorry that this encounter didn't go well, please feel free to come back when it's, when you can, when it's convenient. And is there anything else that we could do better next time?
Excellent. Wow, thank you. Wonderful. Learned a lot just on that conversation alone, in addition to the whole presentation. I know that some of you may have to leave at 1 o'clock. If that's the case, I really want to thank you very much. Again, this round goes till 1:30. So if you can stay, definitely welcome you to stay. But really want to thank those who are leaving. And if maybe Bretta or Anne-Marie, if you can put up a link on the chat room, we'd love to get your feedback, a little bit of survey. Let's continue. Margaret asks, Margaret, thanks for your thoughts. Again, Terry, just let you know, many people said thank you very much for your presentation. So you're really hitting a great note there. Margaret's question is, could you share any reflections you have on how environmental racism and environmental determinants of health fit in the culturally safe healthcare? Terry, could you expand on that, your thoughts?
Sure. And I guess just a quick quote or a quick comment about the reading list. I do have one that I've kind of drafted, and I can include that with my PowerPoint slides to have posted. So yeah, that's a great question. It's one of those things that they definitely influence each other. And so like, it is one of those things that, each of us as individuals have, power and autonomy and can make changes in our own lives and spheres of influence. But it's also cognizant that we're often in systems that don't support, that may not support changes or adaptations in your own behavior. And actually, when we look at cultural safety, humility training, research, we actually for studies that follow people over time, that they find that, generally it has a positive impact, and, people are really, motivated to go back to their clinics or to their hospitals and implement what they've learned. But over time, that they kind of lose the skills or lose the teachings that they learned. And one of the most common reasons cited was because, like, well, like nobody else practices this way. The system doesn't really support it. I have all these barriers, and it just kind of fades away. And so it's really important to kind of look at, and I know this is kind of said probably way too much, but it's really important to look at like system level change and also the kind of on the ground solution. So that kind of top down, bottom up approach is really important. And there are models through things like the Institute of Health Improvement around health equity. And there's even some assessment tools that came out of Australia around like looking at how implicit and explicit biases may be in your organization and different things like that, because so that you can, I guess, assessment tools, so you can kind of see where are some of the blind spots, where are some of the areas that we can really start to work on right now from a system or organization perspective. Is really important. And if I'm reading the question correctly, I don't know if that's in general what you meant by environment, or if you meant environment as in, Mother Earth, outside nature. And that like the environmental health and the connection to our physical health, like as humans, that connection is, is being proven more and more by conventional research and conventional medicine. But it's definitely something that, my elders and knowledge keepers have known and passed down for many years. It's really important that we that we look at things more holistically, and not just about how it could affect us or our next generation, but generations down the road. And again, one of the teachings that I received was around like the 7 generations teaching. So we try to think about our impacts 7 generations down the road. And so balancing, so really like looking at how can we ensure that people have, that we maintain a minimum level of clean air, clean water, and we can have access to green spaces. Even just like being out in nature is so good for our medicine wheel, our mental or emotional well-being, our physical well-being. We're much more active when we're outside. And so how can we ensure that we keep that? But then also looking at our, the social determinants of health more widely, like, how can we ensure people have access to clean water, to healthy foods, healthy, nourishing foods? How can we help address like things like childhood trauma? Like all of these things can have such a huge downstream impact, and definitely needs to be part of the conversation. Again, like we tend to think so, we tend to kind of focus our efforts once there's a problem. So once there's a disease diagnosis or once there's a symptom, we're really kind of Indigenous philosophy is around prevention. Like how can we be healthy? How can we keep our health and wellness? And so I think, it's not an either or, but it's like a both and. I'm not sure if that completely answered all parts of that question, but.
Very good. Thanks. So Margaret, welcome. If you have further thoughts, please add to the notes. When you were, Terry, talking about the assessment tools, there are a couple of individuals saying that, would you be able to share those tools or where they might be able to find? So if you can, that'd be great. And also I want to thank Yvette. You've highlighted some Vancouver Coastal Health Library catalog website. For those of you interested, please refer to the chat for that particular website. Assessment tools, Terry, anything, any chance you can share that with us?
Yeah, for sure. I might have to dig for the Australia one, but
That's great. Anna also asked a great question. She is asking the fact that, I have patients who fail to return for follow-up appointments. And we can't even reach them by phone, email, or if we do reach them, they say they'll come, but then fail to show. How can I make contact in a more successful way, or are there ways that we can support our patients so that they would more likely to come back in those situations? Terri, your thoughts?
yeah, so this yeah, the problem's not unique to you, or that is not unique. And there could be many different reasons for that. Within Carissa County, our communities are spread out over I think 2,000 square kilometers, and there's pretty much the doctors move, the counselors move, we're all moving parts. And so, but a considerable amount of our time is sometimes just trying to locate people, because just like we're moving around, our patients move around. And so, yeah, and so again, it's one of those ideas I'm sure you guys are all going to hate when I say this, but it all depends. But some of the things that we do that help is that for certain individuals, with their consent, of course, is to ask if there's like a trusted person that they have regular contact with. And so in our team, sometimes that's the doctor, but sometimes that's the care aide that goes to their house, every 2 days, or sometimes that's the nurse who's in the community more than we are, or the community health rep, or sometimes it's their auntie or their cousin. And so it could be variable, but if they have somebody in the community that they trust, that they have regular contact with, then sometimes it's just asking permission. It's like, would it be easier for you if I make appointments with your family doc and they help you arrange to come? Or is it okay if I make the appointments with your husband or your wife, if that's better? And so we find that sometimes that could be really helpful. So for some of our patients, we book their imaging for them and things like that. Part of it could be socioeconomic issues, that people, don't always have the funds to keep the same number going. Sometimes they have pay as you go phones, and when they run out of minutes, that's it. And so sometimes it's just, a technological issue. And so sometimes with that, there could be numbers where you can, or places where you could leave messages for them, depending on, on their living situations and things like that, who may be able to kind of connect and reach the patient to let them know when an appointment's being booked. And then the other piece is just, I guess, around that, like registering impact. And so I'm just asking if there's ways that, like anything you can do to make it easier for them. Like, maybe you have multiple clinics and you think that this one would be the best one for them to come, but really this one's easier because they have somebody they can catch a ride with that goes right by there. Or sometimes like office spaces can feel really intimidating. Some of my patients have mentioned going to specialist offices and they have elaborate statues and art and, all of these things. And, when you're somebody who, doesn't have much, that can feel really intimidating. And I'm not saying that you need to redecorate, but, if there's ways that you can maybe adapt the space a little bit, or even just put them in the exam room right away, or something like that, just to help make them feel more comfortable. But yeah, or even having comment boxes and things like that, if they would feel more comfortable doing anonymous feedback. But yeah, that can be really helpful. I think a lot of the stories I've heard is that, people, people can have a variety of reasons. And, some people actually wouldn't mind if you just ask, one of the specialists kind of shared with me that, she would never make a big deal if somebody missed an appointment. She gets that there's all these barriers, she was somebody who is a really big ally. And so she would just, kind of carry on. And one of the patients stopped and was like, no, I want to share with you why I didn't come last time. and, and shared her story around, how difficult it was to, make the appointment, how scared she was. And part of her healing was to be able to share that. And so if you feel comfortable, sometimes just asking is like, is there a reason that you didn't show up last time? Is there, anything you want to talk about? And even just, again, just kind of being open and curious about it can be really helpful.
Wow, wise words. Many people said really, again, really appreciate your advice. And also some people comment on the fact that, these are great principles to practice for all patients. And really, I think, Terry, you really show a heart of curiosity and honesty, and also respecting the patient. So I think all those are very good. Laurel, I forgot to come to you. I know I'm missing some stuff. So maybe let me turn over to you. Have I missed any comments or questions so far? What have you been seeing? Welcome your thoughts, Laurel.
Thanks, Kendall. Vanessa asked about taking in some of these recommendations in an overwhelmed and understaffed clinic. How would you counsel staff who are already feeling a lot of time pressure to do this work of slowing down and taking more time?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think, I definitely think that that's one of those like system issues that I think are one of the factors that influence people who, after they do training, they go back and find it really hard to implement what they've heard, what they've learned. I think part of it is advocacy. So looking at how can we create a system that is more holistic, not for our patients, but also for us? How can we ensure that we can center and ground, that there's a space for, if you just ran a code, how you can, recenter to go in to talk to, worried parents with a baby with a rash. So it just seems like different ends of the spectrum. So how can you integrate and still show up in a good way? And then also giving patients the time. And so, I think some of the research around this is that if you interrupt less, if you let the patients talk, that it actually does take less time. I would say in my life, that's not always true. I think we're all complex humans, and sometimes we have a lot to say. And so I think sometimes creating clear expectations. So, kind of related to the last comment, especially with virtual care, I've seen a couple comments around that, is that sometimes it takes me a little bit to track them down. And so I might have to call a couple different numbers. And so then some of our time is eaten up. So just to say, when I connect with them and say hi and stuff and be like, I'm really sorry, but we, had a bit of trouble connecting today. And I only have 15 minutes, and sometimes that can just help to, I guess, let people know what your limitations are. And then always asking if they would like to follow up. Or sometimes people, they could come with a lot of things that are concerning for them. I don't want to say complaints, but things that are that they would like to discuss, or sometimes they mention something right at the end. And so again, trying to listen and as best as you can, and then just say like, I agree. I think that this is really important. Can we make a time to connect? And if you think it's like urgent, but you're really in a time crunch, you can even say like, can I give you a call back at the end of the day if you have that ability? If you work in care teams, sometimes also asking if somebody else can follow up with them. So in my world, like I'm fortunate that I work with community health nurses. And so sometimes I'm like, if I didn't feel like I was able to address everything, I will call the community health nurse and be like, hey, can you get them to pop over to the health center? If you can you just pop over and make sure they're okay? And that can be helpful too, especially if people have a lot. And yeah, so, and I think there's some ways, I guess, that you can set it up so that, you know, if it's initial visits, sometimes you can set up a couple so that the patient already knows that they're going to have a chance to kind of delve into things more thoroughly. And then I think there's a role for advocacy to say that, you know, in some of my clinical work, when we've done evaluations, the things that people say are the most important is that, you know, that they trust their provider. But the second common one is that they just want to spend time with the provider. And, you know, that usually makes them feel very cared for, even if we can't address everything. And so I think there is a role for advocacy so that we can help, you know, be able to spend that time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. And I see that Sandra Boyd has also said that if there are social workers on your team, they're trained to gather a full assessment and have the time to listen to stories. And so that's another suggestion.
Oh, and that's actually, I will just to follow up on that too, is that sometimes we take for granted that the patients know all the resources available and wait for them to ask. But another great tool is to ask people if you know of resources in your hospital or your clinic that, you know, just to offer them to patients, because you never know if that's something that they're struggling, like, you know, that they would like. Sometimes, again, we make assumptions over who needs, you know, to say, see a social worker or who would want to engage with the Indigenous health team and things like that. But really to just try to offer it as much as possible and letting patients be able to decide.
Excellent. Wow, this is a great conversation. We are starting to draw to the end. We're about 10 minutes left. I did see a couple of other questions and comments, but again, Terry, just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think when I'm reading through the comments, they just really appreciate your heartily sharing some of your tips. One of those questions was, are there certain types of body languages that you may you feel that can help with improving communication and increasing safety in communicating with our Indigenous community members and patients?
Yeah, so again, I would say it probably depends. Especially with body language, there's a lot of assumptions made in this area. So I want to heavily caveat this with, you know, it really depends on the person. But, you know, Sequale, who maybe many of you know, she's from Squamish Nation. She's one of the elders with Fnha. She often teaches around like really having an open and receiving posture, like in Coast Salish territories. You know, they raise their hands in a receiving, thankful stance. But I mean, even, you know, for many of us in our training, you know, we were taught this as well. Like if you're standing there like this, people register that as like more closed off. And so trying to remember to, you know, to try to have more of a receptive body stance language, you know, things like sitting down, obviously in Emerge, not as easy. But yeah, just things like that. You know, sometimes being cognizant of facial expressions and different things like that for yourself, but also how they may impact other people. Because again, we can interpret that, you know, our face looks like it's, you know, we're trying to look concerned, but, you know, it can be interpreted as like you're angry or you're upset with them. And things like that. So just kind of checking in, like, especially if you notice a change, being like, is everything okay? Like, I just wanted to check in. Yeah, and then there's oftentimes people kind of talk about eye contact. And that kind of as a general rule that Indigenous people don't like to make eye contact, which is not necessarily true. It's very dependent on the Indigenous person and their nations and their teachings. How I was taught growing up is that, to make direct eye contact with people of authority or elders was considered rude because our eyes were seen as gateways into our souls, into our spirits. And so you do it, with permission, or you do it with, it's like, it's an intimate thing. And so for some people it may be challenging. And for me, I'm one of those people. Eye contact is something I trained myself to do, but it's not something that I feel super comfortable, especially, with people that I see as authority to me. Zoom makes it super easy. I just stare at myself all day. I'm just kidding. But that's not true for everyone. I've had a lot of Indigenous people say that's like, no, that's not my teachings. I want eye contact. That to me is respectful. So it really just kind of depends.
Got it. Maybe Laurel, any other? I have one more I read from Charlotte. I was thinking about, when you enter a space, maybe take a minute to either a minute of silence or thanking the creator. Is that a good universal approach? Is there, again, dependence? I'm sure it depends. In general, do you feel that that's a good practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your comfort level, right? Like, I think we all have our different styles, and I think you want to do something that resonates with you and feels good and natural, because if it doesn't, then people can usually tell. And so if that's something that that resonates with you, then I think that that's a great practice. Yeah. And again, I think it's like always a permission thing, like, as well, just like, it's a good intention, and then just, assessing impact, but like, was that okay for you? Or even just asking, like, is there a way that you would like to start this call today? One of the ways I like to do it is just to take a deep breath, or, to call in the creator, or, and is that okay with you? And yeah.
Excellent, thanks. Laurel, do you see any other questions?
Yeah, Yvonne is asking, Terry, if you have any comments about cultural safety work for non-Indigenous, non-white healthcare providers who may have had experiences of racism of their own.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think, I think we often, think about how these biases affect our patients, and we don't necessarily talk as much about how racism impacts people who actually work in the system, which can be significant. And I think it's especially important when a lot of the recommendations have to do with hiring, more diverse staff, Indigenous people, and different things like that. It's great to have good recruitment strategies and to make your places more diverse, hopefully at all levels. But after people are hired, what is your approach to actually making it a good place for people to work that is safe? And I don't think that that's something that's done as well. And, certainly I see that with admissions programs where, there's a lot of effort to kind of get people to, into med school or nursing school or what have you, but there isn't as much supports for them once they're in. And again, people from, different areas, who may be rural, who may be from different backgrounds, who may be people of color, that could be really important, because the training can sometimes be extremely traumatizing. And especially if they have to witness or experience racism on a regular basis. And so I think it's actually interesting in the time that we are now, in that Indigenous organizations, like, for instance, the Indigenous Physicians Association of Canada is actually has been connecting with and partnering with the Black Physician Group of Canada. That may not be their actual official title. I may have mixed up the word there, but to actually work together, because, when we start talking about anti-racism and how we address it, it definitely doesn't just impact Indigenous people. And looking at it from that quote unquote BIPOC perspective, Black, Indigenous, people of color, because like as providers, we can experience racism from patients, but we can also experience it within each other or between each other. And so, it's one of those things that the idea of ethical space, again, can be applied to people from many different worldviews, and really like, how can we work together in a good way? And that's not just between people of color and non-people of color, but also between people of color, people from different religious groups. And I think like around the principles of being humble and curious is always really important, but really like looking at, we have a lot of zero tolerance policies and different things like that, which are great, but we need an accountability structure, and we need places where we can have these tough conversations. That isn't necessarily like a conversation around harassment where we get legal involved and HR, but really just being like, I feel unsafe when this happens, or when you said that, I felt like it was, targeting a part of about who I am as an Indigenous person or as a woman, and just like having spaces where we can just share that this is the impact that your words or your behaviors had on me. Is that what you intend? I really, the healing is in those tough, courageous conversations and making them quote unquote normal, but having the support and resources that support that kind of work.
Wow, wonderful. Terry, really want to thank you so much. Time just flies by, and however, your wisdom is just tremendous in capturing our audience and really teaching a lot of great wisdom and sharing. So really appreciate the discussion about the safe care and the safe space, and how do we look at curiosity, look at respect, look at kindness, and also reciprocity. When we encounter our Indigenous community members, and how do we express our love for them, to support them. So Terry, thank you so much for this. Everyone, thank you very much for being here. Momentarily, I would ask Bretta to put the link on again, so that on chat. So we'd love to get your feedback. Our next round will be March 24th. And we're very fortunate we have Dr. David Tu and Dr. Michael Dumont from Urban Indigenous Health and Healing Cooperative, and also the Luma Medical Center, who will be sharing their wisdom with us, really on this series on understanding dimensions of health and wellness, from principles to practice. I really want to thank all of you for excellent questions, excellent comments, and really make this a wonderful learning environment for all of us. I want to thank the Vancouver Coastal Health Aboriginal Health Unit, Leslie Blanchard and Laurel and Patricia, really planning this together. Again, I also want to thank Ministry of Health and Vancouver Staff Association for supporting these rounds. And finally, I want to thank my ICON colleagues for teeing this up very, very well, Bretta and Suzanne and Anne-Marie. So thank you very much. It's 1:30. I wish you all peace. Thank you so much for being here with us. We hope to see you on March 24th. Thank you very much. Bye.